Hello, welcome back to Harkins Haven. Today we're in a little bit different setting than normal. This is our kitchen, and I want to take you along on some of the ways we use the food that we are growing on our homestead. So we are still very early in our journey of homesteading, so we still are buying quite a bit from the grocery store or farmers markets or etc. etc. But we are in the process of switching over to whole foods, so we cook mostly from scratch, which honestly for me has been a fairly easy journey because I grew up eating a lot from scratch, so that really hasn't been a hard switch. Some of the few things like using whole chickens instead of chicken pieces has been different, and that's one of the things we're going to be doing today is roasting a few of our whole chickens and then parting them out and using them in a bunch of different meals. One of our very close friends from our small group her mother died last weekend, and so we are participating in a meal train with our small group to get them meals for this week, and tomorrow is our meal day. So there are her family, plus she's got some out-of-town guests, so there's quite a few of them at their house. So we're gonna make them a really big meal, and we're just gonna eat the same meal we were making for them for a couple nights this week. So I'm just gonna make it even bigger so that we have some for us. So we're gonna do all of that. Tonight though, I started this too late to get all of that done for tonight. So tonight we're gonna make an easy, quick meal, a family favorite that is still mostly from scratch, and we're gonna use some of the new pork that we just got. We're gonna make sausage rice casserole, and I'm gonna show you my not really by the recipe version of like a condensed cream of chicken soup, cream of mushroom soup idea. So I'm going to take you along on all of that this afternoon as we start getting all of these meals made using stuff that we have grown on the homestead and are making from scratch. And you'll find that these are not elaborate meals. This is not fine dining. This is not, let's see if I can make a bunch of things I've never made before. This is old-fashioned. We're making macaroni and cheese with chicken. We're making sausage rice casserole, which I have been making since I was a teenager myself. Just some fairly easy stuff. So let's do it. So I have my rice maker here. I'm a huge wimp. I despise making rice on the stove. I never can get it to come out right. So rice maker it is. So we're just going to use 2 cups of rice, 4 cups of liquid, and rice is one of the places I like to use our broth quite a lot. This broth siphoned pretty bad, so we're trying to use up all of the imperfect jars first, but because it's siphoned, I do need to add a little bit of liquid. So I just filled that the rest of the way up with water. And I'm going to dump the whole thing right in there. Tell it to go. We're going to start the bread that we're going to need for our friends. We're going to make some rolls, and I'm going to use the bread or the hamburger bun recipe from Ruth Ann Zimmerman. I'm not going to give you a complete recipe on that because it's her recipe, not mine. But I can link her video if you'd like. Here, we're gonna stir right here. Well, we have to melt this butter, and Blaine's favorite thing to do right now is to stir. He also likes to eat butter. Blaine, wait. You're gonna stir it in. So Brian would say that love of eating butter definitely comes from my side of the family, and I'm kind of okay with that because, you know, butter is pretty yummy, and I'm okay that Blaine wants to eat it. We're also going to start this cast iron skillet over here so we can start our pork. That's Mama's knife. Yeah, Blaine doesn't touch knives. Mama touches knives. Do you want to stir this one too? Okay, just a minute. I'll get you us something to stir with. We're just gonna add some of our spices straight to the pork to make it into sausage. Sort of. So this is what you call very exacting measurements. I'm just sort of adding some of the ingredients approximately. I don't actually have all the ingredients for the recipe that I looked up, so this doesn't really have a very strong sausage flavor. So if I were going to do this again, you're supposed to actually mix in all the spices and let it sit for a little while before you cook it. So we're going to try that next time and see if our sausage is a little better. The butter for the bread melted and I added the water and the milk, and it's very, very hot. We're going to let this cool ever so slightly because this is very hot, and then we will add our yeast. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our cream of soup in here. I'm going to start with the butter. Put it in the pan. So while Blaine stirs this, basically you let your butter melt, and then we're going to add a little bit of flour and cook that for a minute or two just to get the flour flavor out. Blaine likes to stir this part quite a bit, but that just takes a second to get the flour all cooked in, and then we go ahead and add the rest of our ingredients. Because this is cream of mushroom soup, I just added a can of mushrooms. Normally you would add fresh mushrooms and saute them a bit, but I didn't have any, so canned it was. And then we just boil that in a little bit, add some cream or milk depending on what you have. Cream just makes it slightly thicker, and we cook that in. And now we're going to add all of it to a pot. So here's the rice we made together, and we're just going to add it all to a big bowl with our cream of soup, which Blaine tried to add sausage to. That's why it's chunky. And then we'll go ahead and add our sausage and stir it all together. And that's pretty much how difficult it is just adding these together, mixing, and moving on with your life. Then we're going to add it to our bowl. We're going to stick it in the oven just for a few minutes. I usually do 350 for 10 or 15 minutes just to give it a chance to warm all the way through, meld all the flavors, and become super delicious. And we're going to move on to finishing our bread now that it's a little cooler. Our butter mixture is a little cooler. We're just going to finish off this bit of yeast and add some extra, about 2 tablespoons, and then just let it fizzy up a bit before we come back and add some salt and our flour. And then it's just a matter of getting all the flour in there and kneading the bread dough in the mixer. I did decide this dough was a little too sticky, and then I added a little bit extra flour. This is only about a 1/4 cup. It's just hard to get into the side of the mixer one-handed. And that's just bad experience with this recipe. And then we just kneaded it for about 5 or 6 minutes and moved on to opening it up and letting it rise. You can tell that it got to the end of the night and I got tired because I got really picky with this. Just don't be picky. It's much simpler life. So we're just going to cover this up and let it sit until it rises. It took a little under an hour, I think is what I gave it, and it was wonderfully risen. So the 2 meals that we're making, we're actually going to we're making 1 meal, but 2 parts of the meal. And one of them is going to be a macaroni and cheese pasta dish with chicken in it. And the other is going to be a broccoli rice casserole, also with chicken in it. That way there's something that's a little bit more traditionally kid-friendly and something that's for a little bit more for adults. I've got just some broccoli that I'm trying to get into fairly small pieces. And I've got my rice maker going again to get some more rice. You guys already saw me do that, so I didn't film that part again. We're also making rolls, which I'll show you how I'm doing that. Otherwise, let's just get this broccoli all chopped up. The gray bowl over here is for the chickens. We'll take that out to the chickens the next time we go and feed them, and they will love all these scraps that we don't really want to eat. So, unbeknownst to me, at some point today, my toddler turned my chicken down to low instead of more of the medium high I had it on. So the chicken is not ready for tonight's cooking, or it's not cooked. So it's going to keep cooking, and we're going to finish the chicken portion tomorrow. What we're going to do right now is shred up some of the cheese. I can go ahead and put all the components in the fridge tonight and then finish up assembly tomorrow. So I'll have the rice made, I'll have the broccoli ready, I'll just have to steam it, and I'll have the cheese ready. Chicken will be ready tomorrow, and we'll make the noodles tomorrow because they're easier to mix in when they're not frozen or not cold. So this is just a little shredder attachment for my KitchenAid. I'm just going to turn this on. This is raw sharp cheddar, which is one of our favorites. We're just gonna do a batch of this. This is pretty coarsely chopped, shredded, just because we're gonna melt it anyway. I might, if there's tacos or something, might do a little bit finer, but it's not. Actually, speaking of tacos, tacos is on our menu plan later this week, so I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit extra. Just make sure I have enough grated for that too. So I don't have to get this out and do it again. When we do our mac and cheese, we like a mix of cheeses. That's my personal favorite, and my family indulges me because I cook it and they just eat it. And so I'm going to shred a little bit of this mozzarella as well. There is a discrepancy in my house on what's the best cheese. My husband would tell you sharp cheddar, hands down, no contest. I think it depends on what you're doing with the cheese you need. So, fun tip. Cheese that you've touched will actually go bad faster. So that's why I'm leaving the blocks still in their plastic. So that way I'm not touching all over them while I'm handling them, and it will make them last longer. I will probably cut this in half-ish and put some of it in the freezer too, but that's not a task for tonight. We've got the cheese done, so now let's move on to the next step in our rolls. So this has risen once. We're going to make little dough balls to make rolls. I'm just working them to make them sort of smooth on the top, folding them under and under and under, trying to make them about the same size. My dough is usually stickier than a lot of people's. If I make it the same stickiness, it's too dense for us. So to make this less sticky, you would add more flour, which I could totally do, and it would still make a very good roll, but it would be a little less light and fluffy, and my family just likes the light and fluffy a little bit, so I can't do the rolly on the counter that you've probably seen other people do. But just doing it like this, you can form a very nice little roll. That's too big. And when they rise, no one will know you didn't do it the other way. This recipe normally does hamburger buns. This is a hamburger bun recipe. And every time I make hamburger buns, I make a whole recipe, even though it makes like 12 hamburger buns. And then my family just eats them as rolls for the next however long they last, which is not very long. When I do that, I use the mason jar lid to make them the right size. These rolls are going to be smaller in diameter and taller, more like a roll than a bun for like a hamburger. If I was going to do that, I'd put them out on a cookie sheet. These don't really take a hugely long second rise, so I've already got the oven preheating. I'm not going to have quite enough room in this pan. I've got them spaced just enough to give them some room. Oops, they're sliding. So that when they do rise, they have a little bit of space. They can get a little bit bigger, but not a ton.
So another option when you're doing this is that you can put these in a cast iron pan. That works pretty well too, and just gives them a little crispier bottoms, just to change it up a little bit. I don't have enough cast iron to do this many rolls in cast iron, and I just didn't think about it on this day, so we're doing them in glass. But there you go, more options. The rolls go in for like 10 to 15 minutes, so they really don't take very long. So this is actually a pretty quick recipe if you need bread for some reason pretty quickly. And I didn't film it, but I do go ahead and make a second batch exactly the same way the next day, because once I got all of the rolls in for our friends, we didn't have any left over for us, and that would have been a tragedy. So that was about all I got to on that day, but I did go ahead and call it a night, and come back the next day to make cookies, which is what we're doing here. It's just the Nestle Toll House recipe. You can Google it. And I just made it with homegrown ingredients. I don't actually use the Nestle Toll House chocolate chips, but are nice, healthier ones. But it's the same recipe, and we like it a lot. So, tip for cookie making that I always have to remind myself, you do actually have to spread your cookies out pretty far to account for proper airflow after they've spread out a bit. And I don't know the science behind that. I just know that you get better cookies if you spread them out a little bit. And so I do a cookie rotation when I do this. So I'm going to fill up this cookie sheet and I'll stick them in the oven. I think it's 8 or 9 minutes. And then, yeah, see, I'm not doing very good at the spreading them out. And then I will go ahead and make the next batch on a different cookie sheet. As you can see here, we're changing our cookie sheets out. And then I can always just keep rotating them. It usually takes 4 or 5 cookie sheets to get through one batch of cookies. And then we're going to go ahead and put them on a cooling rack. I leave them to cool on the cookie sheet for a couple minutes and then move them over onto the cookie rack so I can reuse the same baking sheets for the next set of cookies. And then we packaged them all up with our rolls. I just use these reusable things so our friends don't have to worry about trying to bring dishes back. Now we're going to go ahead and get into our chicken. And I just roasted this in the roaster oven until it reached an internal temperature of about 165. And we're going to take all the chicken off the bones so that we can use it in our dishes. So I usually just do this by hand. You give the chicken a minute to rest so it's not super hot. But then I just pick the meat off the bones and stick the bones and the skin and anything else that I'm not sure about, tendons and whatnot, into the other bowl, which I will then stick back in the roaster oven to make broth. So it's not a waste to put things that you're unsure of in the trash bowl. And this is not the most entertaining process, but it really doesn't take that long as your meat is cool enough to the touch. I will say that if you wait and put your meat in the fridge overnight, it is a lot harder to take it off the bone when it's cold. So just let it cool a little bit till you can touch it and just go ahead and take it off. You can debone your chicken before you cook it, and then it would cook faster. But so it kind of depends on where the time is. I think this gives you more chicken off the bone than trying to debone it ahead of time. But it's up to you and what you have time for and when you have that time, if you have it at the beginning or at the end. And then I just put the whole back, when I'm done getting as much meat off of it as I can, into the stock pot bowl. And we'll have some good chicken broth for whatever we want to do next. So the broccoli recipe does call for some onions. Probably should have been a little bit more than this, but this half an onion in the fridge was all I had at the time, so that's what we used. And I am dicing it fairly small because onions are one of those things that if kids see them, sometimes they flip out. And since I don't know if my friends' kids will eat onions, I diced them small enough that they would probably never notice. And then we're going to put them in this pot with some lard, as lard is just because that's the fat I have. And we're just going to saute them a little bit to get them nice and tender. Once they are good and tender and have just a little bit of color on them, because that's what makes goods flavor, we're going to add a little bit of garlic. I could add fresh garlic here and saute it up, but I didn't have any on this day, so garlic powder for the win. We're just going to mix that in, give it a minute to release some of its flavors before we move on to the next step. I'm just trying to make sure that everything gets as cooked as possible so that it's least onion obvious as possible. While we are waiting for those last little bit to come up to temperature, our water was boiling, so I added our noodles. We are going to have to do 2 sets of noodles, but this is the first one. Back to our onions, we're adding some chicken broth because the next thing we're going to do is add a bunch of our broccoli so that we can steam it in that chicken broth with the onion flavors, so it turns out with as much flavor as we can. And I'm just seeing how much of this broccoli I can put in this pan. I will have to do a second set, but we'll get started with what we've got while our noodles are cooking. And then while that steams, we're going to shift over to doing our macaroni and cheese. So I've already taken the noodles out, and now we're going to make the roux sauce, which is just butter and melted butter and flour, just to let the flour cook a little bit. This is going to become our thickening agent. I can link my recipe that I sort of use as inspiration here. I will tell you that it seems like it makes a lot of cheese sauce. It always, I wonder, wait, why am I, this is too much. It's never going to work. Just trust the process. The more cheese sauce, it should be like dripping with cheese sauce at the end. So this is milk that we're adding in, and then some cream or half and half just to get the creaminess factor. I am making a double batch here, so that is why, even for what I just said about being extra saucy, it's still a lot of sauce. A little bit of salt and pepper to taste, and then we're going to let this heat up and thicken a bit before we add our cheese. Weirdly enough, this recipe calls for mustard. A lot of macaroni and cheese recipes call for that. And if you've never tried it, I highly recommend it because it gives just that very barely hint of tanginess. You almost don't even realize it's mustard. So if you have people in your house that don't like mustard, just don't tell them you put it in there, and they'll probably still love this. And then we're going to add a crazy ton of cheese. Doing 2 or 3 kinds of cheese always just makes this a little bit better. It's not necessary if you don't have that much cheese, but if you can. And then I'm doing a cheater method here. You're supposed to mix this all up together and then pour it in the pan, but I'm just putting it in the pan and then layering it. So this is the chicken that we pulled off the bone, and I'm just going to scatter that on top, giving a pretty hefty amount of chicken just to make sure that, because this is going to be a 1-pot meal, I want to make sure you have enough chicken to make it feel like a full meal, get all your protein requirements, etc. So just either pulling it apart or dicing it to make it small enough to be bite-sized, spreading it across the top, and then I'm going to pour the cheese sauce all over that. So like I said, there's one for our friends and one for us, and our family loves this meal so much that you would think that with only 3 of us, this would be a lot of food, but it's not. It's only like 2 meals. So I'm just spreading the cheese sauce as evenly as I can over both the 2 macaronis so that we get all the goodness. And like I said, it does look like a lot of sauce, but it does soak into the noodles a bit and makes it excellent. And that is all for our macaroni. We're just going to box it up. This is to make it look a little prettier, and put it in the fridge for later. Right before we eat this, I will stick it in the oven on 350 for a few minutes just to rewarm it and make it melty again. Then we're going to switch back to doing our rice and broccoli. So that was the rice we made earlier plus the broccoli. We're just going to mix it all in together and add our cheese and other ingredients like our chicken. And again, I'm just sort of hand shredding / dicing this. You can tell it's very precise with how much is going in there. I'm just putting in enough chicken to make it look good, and so that the ratios sort of make sense. So in the end, this recipe did turn out a little bit bland. So if I were to do it again, I would put a lot more flavorful spices and stuff in it. I think it needed some salt and maybe some different spices. So when you make this, just think that through, or maybe at this step even taste it, because everything in here is cooked, so it would be fine to taste it and just see what spices you might want to add. And then we're going to dump this into our bowls. And I did make one for our friend. It's just not showing here because I had to make this recipe twice. And then that should be everything that we have made together. So here's a final overview of all the things we're taking to our friends. And I just want to say thanks for being here and for cooking with me today. It was a lot of fun.